There are moments in life when light meets darkness, not as enemies, but as reflections, each defining the other. For Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo, that moment began on a rain-soaked evening in Shanghai, where fame and fate collided beneath a flickering street lamp. The city hummed with its usual energy, neon signs pulsing, raindrops glistening on car roofs, and the faint sound of distant music echoing through narrow alleys. Xiao Zhan had just left a rehearsal. His steps hurried, his mind lost in thoughts of unfinished lines and melodies that refused to leave his head. The rain had soaked through his jacket, but he barely noticed. His world was heavy with the weight of expectations. His own and those the world had placed on him. That was when he felt it, a presence walking in sync beside him. He turned slightly, his eyes catching the reflection of another figure moving with an uncanny rhythm, their shadows stretching side by side on the glistening pavement. It was Wang Yibo. They hadn't spoken in weeks. The last time they met, the conversation had ended in silence, one of those silences that said everything words couldn't. Fame had drawn them together, but it had also built invisible walls between them, walls that neither dared to break. Still running from the rain, huh? Wang Yibo's voice broke through the storm, calm yet teasing. Xiao Zhan smiled faintly. You always show up when it rains. Maybe the rain likes me, Yibo replied, adjusting his hood as thunder rumbled above them. They walked together without speaking for a while, their steps matching perfectly as though choreographed by fate itself. Yet behind the calm, both carried storms of their own. Xiao Zhan's thoughts were haunted by the headlines, rumors, controversies, and the weight of public judgment that came with every smile and every silence. For Yibo, the darkness came from something deeper, an inner fear that his growing success was turning him into someone he no longer recognized. The rain grew heavier, and they found shelter beneath an old bridge, where the air smelled of wet concrete and forgotten stories. Do you ever feel, Xiao Zhan began quietly, that no matter how far we go, something's always following us? Yibo tilted his head. You mean the fans? The cameras? Xiao Zhan shook his head. No, I mean the shadow. That thing that reminds you of who you used to be. The one you can't escape even when the lights are brightest. The words hung in the air like mist. Yibo didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at their reflections in the puddle beneath them. Two silhouettes side by side, flickering with every passing car light. I see it too, Yibo finally said. But maybe it's not following us. Maybe it's walking with us. The rain slowed, and for a brief second, the world felt still, like time had paused just to let their unspoken truth breathe. They didn't realize it then, but that night marked the beginning of something that would test the limits of their trust, friendship, and the very essence of who they were beneath the fame. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. During a late-night dance rehearsal, Yibo caught a glimpse of someone standing in the corner of the mirrored studio, a faint outline of a man who looked eerily like him. When he turned, the figure was gone. The next day, Xiao Zhan's manager reported seeing someone leave Xiao Zhan's apartment moments before he arrived, though no one else had access. At first, they brushed it off as exhaustion, stress, or coincidence. But then came the video. A fan-captured clip surfaced online, showing both Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo at an event, smiling, waving. But in the footage, something strange appeared behind them. A shadow, tall and featureless, moving independently, almost breathing. The internet exploded with theories. Ghosts, glitches, symbolism. But for Xiao Zhan and Yibo, it was far from symbolic. It felt personal. They tried to ignore it, but the more they did, the closer the shadow seemed to follow. It crept into their performances, their dreams, and their waking moments. One evening, as Xiao Zhan sat alone in his studio working on lyrics, he felt the temperature drop. The pen slipped from his hand. He looked up to see the faint silhouette again. His own reflection in the dark window, but distorted, as if smiling when he wasn't. Yibo arrived minutes later, his expression pale. You saw it too, didn't you? They stood together, looking into the reflection. Two figures, and a third, barely visible, blending into the darkness behind them. "What is it?" Xiao Zhan whispered. Yibo's jaw tightened. "It's the part of us we've been trying to hide. The part fame doesn't let us show." That night they decided to face it. They drove to the outskirts of the city, where the noise of fame couldn't reach. The moon hung low, casting silver light over an abandoned stage where they had once performed years ago, before the world knew their names. There, surrounded by echoes of their past, they confronted the thing that had haunted them. As they stepped onto the creaking wooden floor, the air thickened. The shadows around them deepened, moving like liquid. Then, from the far end of the stage, two figures began to emerge. Identical copies of themselves, hollow-eyed and expressionless. Xiao Zhan froze. "Is this real?" Yibo didn't answer. Instead he stepped forward, his voice steady. "We let them grow. The parts we ignored. The fears, the pain, the loneliness. We fed them every time we pretended we were okay." The shadowy ball moved closer, its voice a cold whisper that echoed through the air. "You can't hide from what you are." Xiao Zhan's double spoke too, mimicking his every tone. "You built your world on smiles. But do you even remember what it feels like to be real?" A fierce wind blew through the empty theater, scattering dust and old memories. For a moment, everything blurred, their real selves and their shadows, locked in a silent standoff. Then Yibo reached out, touching the shoulder of his reflection. It shimmered, flickering like smoke. "We're done being afraid of you," he said. Xiao Zhan followed, stepping toward his own shadow. "You're not my enemy. You're my truth." The shadows shuddered, their forms twisting before dissolving into light that wrapped around them both like mist. The stage lights flickered to life, though no one had touched a switch, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the air was calm again. When they walked out into the early morning, the first rays of sunlight cut through the lingering darkness. The storm had passed. Days later, the world noticed a change. Their performances became deeper, their eyes brighter yet calmer, their smiles no longer the masks of celebrities but the reflections of men who had faced themselves and come back stronger. Fans called it a rebirth. The media tried to explain it as rebranding. But those who looked closer saw something else. Two artists who had walked through their own shadows and returned with light. That night in Shanghai became legend. Some said it was just a metaphor for burnout, others called it a ghost story born from fan imagination. But Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo never spoke of it again. Not publicly. Not even in interviews. Yet whenever they shared the stage or crossed paths, there was a quiet understanding in their eyes. A silent acknowledgement of what they had conquered together. The rain had stopped that night, but for Xiao Zhan, the storm hadn't truly ended. Even as he walked home, his mind kept replaying that single phrase Yibo had said beneath the bridge. "Maybe the shadow isn't following us. Maybe it's walking with us." Those words wouldn't leave him. They echoed in his dreams, painting his sleep with shifting lights and silhouettes that moved just a little too independently from his own body. When he woke, the reflection in his mirror seemed almost alive. His eyes, somehow different, watching him with a calm he didn't recognize. The next morning he was called to a photo shoot downtown. The studio was alive with chatter. Stylists, photographers, makeup artists buzzing around like bees. But Xiao Zhan felt disconnected, as though he was standing on the edge of a world spinning too fast. "Xiao Zhan, we're ready for your solo shots," someone called. He nodded, forcing a smile, stepping in front of the blinding lights. The camera flashed once, twice, then a third time, freezing him mid-pose. That was when the photographer frowned. "Hold on," she said, leaning closer to her screen. "That's odd." "What is it?" he asked. She hesitated. "There's someone behind you." Xiao Zhan turned sharply. The studio was empty except for the crew. But when he looked at the monitor, he saw it. The faint blur of a figure standing just over his shoulder, shaped like him but somehow darker, its face lost in shadow. "Probably a glitch," the photographer said quickly, deleting the photo. But Xiao Zhan knew it wasn't. He could feel it now, like a chill creeping up his spine. The same presence he'd felt that night with Yibo, closer than before. Later that evening he called Yibo. "You felt it again, didn't you?" Yibo's voice was steady, but Xiao Zhan could hear the tension beneath it. "I saw it," Xiao Zhan whispered. "It's not just in our heads, Yibo. It's real." Yibo was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Meet me tomorrow. Don't bring anyone." They met at an old rehearsal hall, one they hadn't used since their early days of training. The wooden floors creaked under their steps, the mirrors fogged with time and dust. It felt like stepping into the past, a place filled with echoes of who they once were. Yibo was already there, sitting on the floor, a single dim light flickering above him. "You're not the only one seeing things," he said quietly. "Yesterday during my dance run, I saw my reflection move before I did." Xiao Zhan sat beside him. "What do you think it wants?" Yibo looked at the mirror. "Maybe it doesn't want anything. Maybe it is us, the parts we've tried to forget." The air around them felt heavy, charged with something unseen. The mirror reflected their images faintly, the edges shimmering like heat waves. Then slowly a movement, subtle at first, began in the glass. Their reflections didn't match their motions anymore. Xiao Zhan raised a hand. His reflection stayed still. Yibo turned his head. His reflection faced forward, eyes hollow and unblinking. "Do you see that?" Xiao Zhan breathed. Yibo nodded slowly. "Don't move." The two figures inside the mirror began to step forward, not walking but gliding, until they stood right against the glass. Crack. A thin fracture split the mirror down the center, spiderwebbing outward as the light flickered. The sound was deafening, like a whisper and a scream at once. Xiao Zhan stumbled back, his heartbeat racing. "Yibo!" Before he could finish, the lights went out. Only the moonlight from the high windows remained, silver and haunting. And in that pale glow, the reflections were gone, yet somehow the room didn't feel empty. A voice, soft, echoing, eerily familiar, spoke from the darkness. "You can't run from yourself." The words were Xiao Zhan's, but he hadn't said them. He spun around, eyes wide, and there it was. The shadow version of himself standing at the far end of the hall, head slightly tilted, eyes glimmering faintly in the dim light. Next to it, another form emerged. Yibo's shadow, leaner, sharper, moving with uncanny precision. "What do you want?" Yibo demanded. The shadows didn't answer. They simply moved, perfectly mirroring every step the real Xiao Zhan and Yibo took. For a long moment, the four of them stood there, two men and their mirrored selves, locked in a silent standoff. Then, almost simultaneously, the shadows lunged. The impact wasn't physical. It was deeper, like an invisible force crashing through their minds. Memories flashed. Stages, spotlights, cheers, pain, betrayal, exhaustion. Every doubt, every fear they had buried to survive in the world that adored and judged them all at once. Xiao Zhan fell to his knees, clutching his chest as visions flooded him. The pressure of perfection. The loneliness behind every smile. The silence after every performance. And then, through it all, he saw the same thing Yibo had seen, the shadow walking beside him, patiently waiting for him to acknowledge it. When he looked up, the shadow version of himself was standing inches away, its expression no longer hostile but sad, tired, even. "I am what you've lost," it whispered. "The truth you buried to stay strong." The realization struck like lightning. This wasn't a curse or a haunting. It was their suppressed humanity, clawing its way back from the darkness. Xiao Zhan reached out, his fingers trembling. "Then take it back. Take what you need." The shadow smiled faintly before dissolving into light that flowed into him like warmth returning to a frozen heart. Beside him, Yibo did the same, embracing his reflection with steady eyes. As the two shadows faded completely, the hall was filled with a stillness so pure it almost sang. The cracks in the mirror shimmered once, then sealed themselves, leaving behind a clear reflection of two men no longer chased by what they feared but whole again. Yibo exhaled slowly, turning to Xiao Zhan. Maybe this was never about escaping the dark. Xiao Zhan nodded. Maybe it was about learning to walk beside it. Outside, dawn had begun to break. The city that never slept glowed softly under the first touch of sunlight, and for the first time in a long while, Xiao Zhan felt free. As they stepped out of the hall, their shadows stretched before them, not behind. From that day on, the world noticed something different about them. In interviews, they spoke with more calm. In performances, their energy was magnetic, deeper, more real. And though they never mentioned that night, the bond between them became unshakable, a quiet understanding of the journey they had shared. For in facing their shadows, they had not only found themselves, they had found each other again. And sometimes, when the lights dimmed before a performance and the crowd waited in silence, Xiao Zhan would glance at Yibo, and Yibo would nod back. No words, just trust, just light. Because the shadow beside them was no longer something to fear, it was a part of their story, a silent witness to their strength. Sparkles, if you were moved by this continuation of The Shadow Beside, don't forget to hit that like button, share this story with your friends, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more breathtaking stories about Xiao Zhan Wang Yibo and the hidden worlds behind the spotlight.